Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's now 2 o'clock and time for me to open this hearing. My name is Melvin Middleton. I'm an economist and a chartered town planner, and I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this examination into the Welwyn Hatfield local plan and to prepare a report on the DPD's soundness for the council. You should all have received a letter from the programme officer with a copy of my examination procedural note, virtual hearing participation note, together with an agenda. I will assume that you've all read and familiarised yourself with the content and therefore dispense with the full introduction and take most of it as read. However, before I get to the matters of the hearing itself, there are some housekeeping items that I still need to deal with. Firstly, if you have any queries about what I'm about to say, other than in response to that, would you please contact Louise St John Howe, whose details you should have already. Also, it's not appropriate to hand in material at the virtual hearings. That should already have been sent to the programme officer for prior distribution. As it said in the virtual notes are sent out, screen sharing isn't allowed. All material that we will refer to or discuss today should be on the examination website. If it is not, then please do not refer to it. Any new material submitted to Louise after this event should only be following a specific request from myself unless there are exceptional reasons. An agenda for this event was sent out subsequent to the invitations and was also posted on the website. I'm presuming that everyone has a copy of it, but if not, then please let me know now. Does anyone have any issues about the form of the agenda? I will lead the event and guide the proceedings, inviting particular people to speak to the matters as we proceed through the agenda. You should not attempt to speak unless invited to. If you wish to speak on a particular matter, please use the hand facility to speak, and that will notify me, and I'll invite you to join the discussion at an appropriate time. For the benefit of third parties watching, the first time that you speak, could you please state your name and, if applicable, whom you're representing? When you finish speaking, the programme officer will turn off the hand facility for you, but please remember to turn your microphone off yourself when you finish speaking. That helps to reduce static interference when other people are speaking and we have a far more audible hearing session. Also, for the benefit of third parties who may be watching this event, when you refer to documents, would you please refer to them using their full title and examination reference rather than by some abbreviation or acronym? As well as the council, I understand that the following persons are participating in this session. Mr. Ross from Anglo-Dane, Councillor Nigel Quinton, Mr. Andrew Marsh and Miss Lynette Fawkes from Historic England. Have anyone arrived from Welwyn Garden City Society yet? And anyone from Bridge Road Developments? Okay. This session will examine the council's proposed revisions to the policy criteria affecting sites in Welwyn Garden City. Some of you are only involved in a limited number of sites, and you're free to log out when you consider that your participation is concluded. But please remember that anyone logging out of the session will not be able to log back in. Also, could I ask you not only to desist from speaking about a particular site when the hearing is specifically discussing another site, but when each of the discussion raises points in accordance with their appearance in the agenda. Please can you also make sure that you are free of background distractions as usual. I'll take a short comfort break at or about 3 o'clock. If we're not concluded by then, which we probably won't have, I will break probably before 5 o'clock, but at the very extreme, we'll carry on until 5:30. If you are likely to wish to contribute to the resumed session after the break, then please do not log out until I've concluded the complete session. Just stay logged in whilst we have an adjournment, but switch off your camera and your microphone if you do not wish any activities in the room that you're working from to be seen or heard by everyone else. I've already visited all the sites, but may revisit them to look specifically at some of the matters that arise from the discussions. If any of you want me to specifically look at an aspect of any of the sites, would you raise it today and also pass the details to the Borough Council before the end of the month? I would ask the Council to coordinate the points to be looked at on a site-by-site basis and to arrange an itinerary. In line with national policy, my starting point for the examination is the assumption that the Council has submitted what it considers to be a sound plan. Those seeking changes must demonstrate why it is unsound by reference to the test of soundness. The Council has submitted most of the sites being discussed today during the course of the examination. If you consider any aspect of them to be unsound, I and the Council need to know why it is unsound and the precise changes to the wording required in order, in your opinion, to make it sound. Please remember that soundness in the context of the allocations does not mean the best or most appropriate. It means that the proposal passes all of the 4 tests of soundness at paragraph 182 of the National Planning Policy Framework 2012. I must stress that in order to obtain a change in the allocation itself or in the policy considerations, you must first of all demonstrate why what is being put forward by the Council is unsound, and secondly, put forward a suggested change in policy wording that would make it sound. Any proposed main modifications will require consultation and may require further sustainability appraisal. As you know, at the end of the examination, I will produce a report which will recommend main modifications that are required to make the plan sound. I would remind you that this plan is still being examined under the guidance set out in the National Planning Policy Framework document that was issued at the end of March 2012. I will refer to it as the framework. Therefore, your observations should be based on that guidance and not the 2018 guidance. The guidance is supported by the National Planning Policy Practice Guidance, which is an electronic document on the government's website that is continuously updated. I've already read the evidence submitted by the respondents and the Council. This means that in our discussions, you will not need to repeat your case to me verbatim or give any sort of formal presentation. As I've indicated, it will be helpful to me if the discussion is broken down into its component parts as set out in the agenda. We will therefore go through each item on the agenda in order. There are a number of generic matters that are common to more than one site. Item 2 provides me with an opportunity to discuss those aspects. Items 3 to 7 discuss the sites themselves, and they are locationally grouped together where appropriate. I'd welcome relevant participation through observations, comments, and questions from any of you involved in each item as the discussion progresses. Turn on the hand facility to attract my attention if you wish to say something. Please note, unless I specifically agree to it, there will be no cross-examination, but putting questions to the opposing parties during the discussion via myself is perfectly acceptable. I will take part in the discussion as well as chairing it. On a more general point, please remember that my job is to challenge the soundness of the entire plan and not just those parts about which there have been representations from third parties. I also have to write a comprehensive report that fully explains why certain aspects of the plan have needed to be changed to make them sound, while other parts are considered sound by me and do not require change despite the representations against them. In order to do this, I need to equip myself with a comprehensive set of evidence that has been tested and justifies my conclusions. You must remember that in some instances, I will act as devil's advocate in order to test the robustness of parts of the assessment that other people are not questioning. In such instances, I will not necessarily be expressing my own opinions. And sometimes I will be specifically expressing the views of third parties who have chosen not to be present. And again, these are not necessarily my own opinions. If the session is not to be excessively prolonged, then it is essential that it remains focused on the remaining considerations that affect its soundness. I will therefore interrupt participants who appear to me to be going off message, I hope politely, but as I come from a different part of Britain than most of you, and where people's language is perhaps more blunt, please don't take offence at anything I say, none will be intended. Are there any questions at this stage on how the hearing is going to be run? If not, then I'll move to the agenda. Item 2 is generic considerations, and the first item I've listed is loss of employment land, which a lot of today's discussion is about. I'd like to start with policy SB8, and this is really addressed at the council. I mean, policy SB8 is about the local economy. It starts off, the council will support economic prosperity, encourage inward investment and the creation of a range of jobs by, first of all, resisting the loss of land from B uses. That's further considered in policy SADM 10, employment development, which sets out the following areas of land as set out in the policies map are designated as employment areas for Class B and associated land uses. And then it goes on and gives a basically list of criteria which in exceptional circumstances can be used for a departure from that consideration. Now, a number of the sites that we're considering today are in area EA1, Welwyn Garden City employment area, and their development is actually contrary to that policy, which I've already found sound. So depending on where we end up today, it may be that that plan may or that the policy may or may not need revising, or it may be that one or more of the proposals are not sound because they're contrary to that policy. So from a generic point of view, do the council wish to comment on that, and where they see the examination going in that context?
Yes. If I may start by introducing myself, this is the first time I've taken part in the examination. My name is Matthew Wilson. I'm a Principal Planning Officer at Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council. In terms of a council approach, we are obviously very mindful that the allocation would reduce the overall available designated employment land. However, the council is keen to ensure that the balance does not unduly shift to a significant undersupply of employment land. I think it is right to note the context in which we are currently working in. The council does not currently have a 5-year land supply, and the presumption in favour of sustainable development applies. Similarly, completions in the borough have fallen below the housing delivery test, and we are a presumption authority. Several of the sites we are discussing are currently vacant, and various planning applications have been submitted for their redevelopment. We have undertaken a robust assessment and a robust approach. I just want to take us back a couple of stages and say that in 2016, when we did our housing employment land availability assessment, we sieved out sites at stage 1 if they were designated or proposed in an employment area. In the context now of exploring our objectively assess need for housing and whether or not that can be met in full, the 2019 assessment no longer sieved out those sites, and they have effectively stayed in and been assessed. I would also like to probably mention that, and we'll come on to it later on, that we do have a number of sites we are going to be discussing that are currently live planning applications, and in one case has been approved subject to section 106. So in the terms of the council's general approach, we do believe we have taken a pragmatic approach in the terms of the balance to be struck between the need for housing and the needs of the economy. Welwyn Garden City will still remain a substantial employment area in line with its position in the settlement hierarchy. We are taking steps to preserve the employment land that is not coming forward as housing allocations through the introduction of Article 4s. And in the terms of our general approach, we do believe we are taking a pragmatic approach because a number of these sites are coming forward, and they are coming forward now.
That doesn't quite explain why SP8 is unsound, though, does it? And I mean, remember, this is a local plan we're proposing, we're preparing. It's not, consideration of planning applications. Well, I perfectly accept the council has to be pragmatic and look at the situation pertaining to a particular site. But at the very least, does not the area that SP8 or EA1 in the context of Welwyn Garden City applies to, should that not get changed? And again, from a local plan context, is the appropriate way to change it to pepper pot sites among that area, or is it more appropriate to, if you like, take a block out of it? Ms. Tiley?
Thank you, sir. Well, as Mr. Wilson says, we've taken a pragmatic approach. These are all sites which were promoted to us through the call for sites. I think you can see from the location that they do cluster along Broadwater Road and Bridge Road. So I think what we're beginning to see is rather than being all in employment use, that what we're beginning to see is a mixed use area. And indeed, the Broadwater Road West site is a mixed use allocation. I think what we are thinking of in this context is perhaps rezoning some of these, or part of the employment area as a mixed use area to allow for the retention of key employment land, but also to recognise that parts of it have now gone to residential, and we're unlikely to be able to resist that.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Beglan?
Thank you, sir. Yes, just following on from the point Mr. Tiley's just made, of course, SP8 is concerned primarily with development management matters that will come forward once the plan is adopted. So once there's been recognition that there may be needs for a change in relation to some of the individual sites that were proposed for employment use because of what has happened on the ground in the meantime, the overarching approach that's contained within SP8 can still be carried forward as a matter of development management. So, as I say, once those changes are made, there's nothing we would say inherently unsound in the approach that SP8 articulates.
Okay. Anybody else want to say anything about that? Okay, I'll move on to noise environment. It was originally put on because of a lot of opposition to most of these sites, actually, from the county council, on the basis of noise from waste management facilities that could locate in the area. They seem to have withdrawn that now, with possible exceptions of areas in the middle where there's a waste recycling site. However, noise from industrial premises is a more generic consideration than just that. A lot of industrial processes are noisy, and mixed use areas, certainly in some parts of the country, haven't worked that effectively. And one has to remember that part of government, or a lot of government policy, is about encouraging the growth of the economy and the creation of employment, and planning system not putting barriers in place to prevent that from happening. So again, transport was put on because when we had a discussion about Central Welwyn Garden City, well, over 2 years ago now, there was a lot of concern about access across from the eastern part into the city centre. It seems to me that from what I've read in the submissions that there are mechanisms for ensuring that improvement already in place, and really we don't need to take any further action. Is that correct, Ms. Tiley?
Yes, but I might invite Mr. Collier to comment.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, yeah, I think most of them have been resolved, and those that are ongoing are more DM issues with various aspects of rights of way and things like that. So yes, no issues for this part of the planning application stage.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Quinton, you got your hand up. I presume you wanted to refer to either the item I've just talked about or one of the previous ones.
Yes, please. I mean, on the transport issues, I mean, I would beg to differ with Anthony and on this point. We've been continually as councillors asking for an area-wide strategy review, again, for this area, given the new volume of development that is coming forward. And we've brought that up in the past year, mostly in relation to the Chewing Road depot discussions. But I don't think, certainly I know from my personal correspondence with residents are not happy that there has been sufficient consideration of the increase in number of dwellings in this area from a transport perspective.
Okay. Anything else? All right, move on to then D, density and height, which again has been raised by people. Certainly, I think Councillor Quinton and the Welwyn Garden City Society have, don't know if you want to say anything about it now or you want to refer it when we get to particular sites. Okay, presumably not.
If I may, sir, I think it's better to address it now because it's a global point rather than a specific site-specific point, I think. I mean, you'll have seen my submission, and the key point here is that we no longer seem to have a master plan for this area. We did have one. It's in the Broadwater Road SPD. That SPD seems to be being ignored by the council in this entire process. And you'll have seen from the examples I've put into that submission that the amount of the density and the heights of building that is laid down in that policy have been completely ignored in these numbers. The SPD covers the Treadywheat site and the Biopark site. I'm not sure if any of the other sites for discussion today are included within it. I would argue that that's why we need a new policy for this area. So if I separate out the three different issues here, the first is height. So the SPD says that buildings should not be above 5 stories. And broadly speaking, that's been adhered to with the permissions being given to date. The existing permission on the Shredded Wheat site does extend beyond 5, but it is clustered around the edges in a way that I have some sympathy with. And when it went through planning, we supported that. And I believe the Welwyn Garden City Society did too, though I can't recall exactly. But the new planning permissions that are being sought and which form the basis of the numbers in the recent HELA go way beyond that. And they're basically looking at a 7-story base with buildings rising to as high as 11 stories. And that is also true of the Biopark, which goes up to 9 stories, and maybe we can cover that under that particular item. That is not what is in the plan. It's not what is in the SPD. Sorry, it's not what is in the SPD, and it should be, unless there is a new master planning process for this area, that should not be. The council shouldn't even be allowing it to come to planning. It should just be ruled out because it's against the policy. So that's first point. The second point, which I think is, I don't know if you want to cover this now, I'm trying to look at the agenda to see where it comes, but open space, which again, the SPD makes particular mention of under 3.8, I think it is, where the sorry, I'm just trying to get the reference. Yes, beg your pardon. 6.38, sorry, the provision of green and open space and development on this site should be a strong feature of the redeveloped site. And I've illustrated in the submission how that was laid out in the original SPD and how it's been chiseled away by successive applications, particularly on the shredded wheat site, but also that it wasn't followed on the Mirage site, which preceded this. You know, those points are there for a purpose in the SPD, and they're there partially because this area is already one of those at the very, very worst end of the spectrum for access to green space by the public. If you look at the Friends of the Earth report that came out a few weeks or months ago, we have a very, very strong contrast between one side of the town and the other. Handside Ward, I represent both Handside and Pear Tree, is category A with very, very good access to open land and countryside and green spaces. Pear Tree is in the worst category, category E, as is Halden's Ward to the north. You know, this is a real issue from not just from the planning perspective, but also from a public health perspective. And I think it is vital that the local plan bears proper regard to the needs of the current population and future populations in this area. And what is being proposed now completely fails to do that. I think I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to add to that? Is it Mr. Can't read your name, Mr. Bensley? Do you want to switch your microphone on, please?
Okay, I support everything Councillor Quinton said, and I won't waste your time going over all that again. I'd just like to say that Welwyn Garden City is an internationally renowned town with key unique town planning features, and the principles of this town seem to be being ridden over roughshod, so to speak, in some of these proposals, particularly along Broadwater Road West, which I was astonished to hear described by Miss Tiley as a mixed use area, when it is quite clearly going to be only a residential area, a residential zone. It would be such a great shame for Garden City principles to be lost here in our very special town. I think I'll leave it at that, sir, for the moment, if I may.
Well, while we're on this, can I introduce, policy SP9 and policy SP15? I mean, it seems to me, without straying into the SPD, that you're in danger of, again, well, effectively straying away from the principles of these policies. If they're not going to be adhered to, then they're not really sound, and you may as well change them to what you think is appropriate for going forward. It talks about in SP15 maintaining the historic environment and character of Welwyn Garden City. Well, either you're going to do that or you're not, and are lots of buildings that significantly higher than what were one or two local landmarks in tune with that. Mr. Oh, no, it's gone. Okay, I'll just park that there for now. Next point is delivery. Oh, Mr. Quinton wants to talk.
Yeah, sorry, sir. I missed one point, and that is just on the overall numbers in this area. We're talking about a very small area, basically from Times Square on Bessemer Road down to the bottom end of Broadwater Road and out as far as the bagel factory, as we call it, on Bridge Road East. Over the last several years, we've already had about 1,135 units added in that area. That's already a significant increase in the centre of the town. And by the way, I'm all for increasing density in the centre of towns generally, but there is a point at which it becomes ridiculous. We are now looking in the HELA, the 2020 HELA, at a total in that very small area of 2,986, as good as damn it 3,000, and that's basically more than a ward's worth of new homes in the 20-year period in what is already one of the densest wards in the borough. And I think, you know, a bit of perspective is required here to well, you don't need a great deal of perspective to realise that that's just not really in keeping with the design principles of the Garden City, but also in terms of the over clustering of too many people in too small a space, and whether that's transport issues, whether it's open space issues, whether it's sufficient infrastructure from a point of view of health and education, it's just not sustainable.
Thank you. Mr. Waller?
Thank you, sir. We're really just responding to some of those comments, and from the perspective of the Garden City, I appreciate that. I appreciate what's lovely about Welwyn Garden City enough, as much as anybody else does. The problem is that it was designed 100 years ago, and the problems we have in terms of housing need and affordability have been racking up for quite some considerable amount of time with under delivery. If the level of housing delivery coming forward now is rapid, on the basis that we're catching up, and a lot of sites are all being allocated because national policy has moved on and allowed that to happen in the absence of a local plan which allocates sites, that's really just in effect a redressing of the balance, because the need for housing hasn't been met for a long time. In terms of the character of the city, of Welwyn Garden City, and indeed of other urban areas in the borough, that obviously has to be balanced against the effect on other parts of the borough, such as the Greenbelt. If some parts of Welwyn Garden City end up being at a higher density to the traditional Garden City areas, I think that really is just a reflection of the fact that there is this continual need for more housing, and things have to move on in some sense. That may be through developing greenfield sites in the Greenbelt, or it may be through intensification of urban areas and higher densities. National policy points firmly in the direction of the latter.
But are they interchangeable?
I think you always need to look at all options, don't you? So there are opportunities to increase the density within the towns in ways which are acceptable. Some planning permissions have already been granted, such as the Shredded Wheat Factory, the Wheat Quarter, which is a much higher density area. Others, I think the council mentioned earlier that there's a site which has got resolution to grant subject to section 106. I'm representing a site which is the subject of the discussion today, which the council have confirmed in writing that they are supporting subject to section 106. Officers are supporting it. We have a planning application in. I think these are realistic prospects which are acceptable in terms of planning applications right now. Obviously, you also need to look at the Greenbelt and wider opportunities for development and providing a range of types of development across the borough. But these are the level of housing that's needed. Obviously, needs all things to be considered.
Yeah, but I wasn't, when I said interchangeable, thinking about the numbers game. I was thinking about specific types of housing. I mean, I presume you're not promoting a site for family housing development. You're promoting a site for flats, which presumably won't have many families in them.
That's true. I have actually, I did write the representations for Gascoigne and Cecil when I was in JV planning a few years ago. So I have also promoted family housing in this plan. I think it's horses for courses in terms of the location. We've got a site which is within walking distance of the centre, and we wanted to get as much in terms of the number of homes there as possible. If you're going to have housing, you'd have a fraction of the number of homes on a site like that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll come back to it in a moment after Councillor Quinton's had another say.
Thank you. I mean, probably the same point you were making it to a degree. I mean, it's not. I think it's a false dichotomy. And as I just said, I mean, this ward has already had 1,000 homes added to it in recent years. It's probably the only area of the borough that has had significant delivery. Unfortunately, most of that's come through PD, so we've had very little 106 money as a result. I think Mr. Wallace said quote, in ways that are acceptable. I completely agree with him. You know, there are opportunities to develop dense accommodation in this setting that are acceptable. All I'm saying is that what is here in totality is not acceptable. I'm not quite sure which site it is that he's talking for. Is it one of the ones on Bridge Road, Mr. Waller? Yeah, I mean, I don't particularly have a problem with those individually. It's more the over-densification along Broadwater Road that I think is a direct concern, particularly as it affects the views of the heritage assets in that area, i.e. the silos, and those are those major sites that are the real problem here, not the smaller developments that probably on their own are okay, but they still need to be brought into a, I mean, we've been asking for a new master plan from Welwyn Hatfield planners for 2 or 3 years while this has been going on, and consistently being told, oh, we haven't got the resource to do that because we're working on the inspection. And which is, talk about cart and horse. We knew these sorts of proposals were going to come forward. The council, it seems to me, have been encouraging them to come forward so that they can preserve the green belt in other parts of the borough. We think that's a political choice. I think you've said that in your comments as well, Inspector. And it's not acceptable to the people of Welwyn Garden City.
Okay, well, as a matter of, basically planning opinion, I mean, I do think it's preferable to use brownfield sites, land within urban areas, as opposed to taking greenbelt. But it's not always possible to actually do it in that way and meet your overall objectives. I'd like to refer you to policy SP7 in the submitted plan, type and mix of housing. Says, in order to deliver a choice of homes and help create sustainable, inclusive and mixed communities, provision will be made for a range of housing to support the needs and requirements of different households. Housing mix, proposals for 11 or more new dwellings should demonstrate how the mix of tenure, type and size of housing proposed on sites will reflect the council's latest evidence of housing need and market demand and contribute towards meeting the various needs of different households, including single person households, couples, families with children, older people, etc., etc. I don't have any issues with the principle, but it strikes me that certainly what's come before me over the past few months are an awful lot of sites, either new to the examination or historic to examination, where I've been told that the density is going up and the number of dwellings that are being delivered has gone up. It also strikes me, having wandered around this area east of the town city centre, that most of the new accommodation is apartments, flats, etc. It's not family family. Were it, if you like, a change of a few hundred, I probably, would just let it pass by. But I think we're talking about, changes in terms of thousands of units, which is, becoming significant even, in what is, a high housing requirement. So my question really to the council is, it says in policy SP7, your latest evidence of housing need, market demand for different types of households. Has that changed since the plan's been submitted? And if it has, why haven't you submitted the evidence?
Shall I? I'll speak on that. So if you look at the supporting text in 9.17, there is further information on housing mix. And table 4 sets out the different sizes and types of new housing that will be required. And that was taken from the strategic housing market assessment. And you will see that there are a number of that the housing type that is likely to be required includes 1-bedroom flats and 2-bedroom flats, totaling to about, slightly over a third of the number of dwellings. We've previously talked about greenbelt sites perhaps delivering not just family housing, but potentially the majority of the housing will be family housing. And Sites which are close to the town centre offer opportunities for higher density development, which is more likely to result in flatter types of accommodation. And we just see these areas as providing opportunities, particularly when you take into account the character of the immediate surroundings, where you get slightly taller buildings and industrial in nature. So flatter type schemes can more readily fit in to the character of the surrounding area, and it's an opportunity to meet that need for 1 and 2 bedroom units. In terms of planning applications that are coming forward, they're not all 1 and 2 bedroom, but the vast majority certainly are. Welwyn Garden City and Hatfield being sort of new town garden city, the preponderance of the housing type does tend to be 3 bedroom dwellings, and doesn't have such a large supply of smaller units. And these locations give you an opportunity to provide that type of accommodation in a way which would fit in with the character of the area and in very accessible locations.
So if I understand what you're saying correctly, is that probably initially you were really only going to meet your housing mix by there being high density elements to the Greenbelt area developments, and that as a result of what's come forward so far and what you're putting into the plan, some of that's going to move into the middle of Welwyn Garden City, and therefore presumably there will be more larger accommodation units out in the Greenbelt.
So Broadwater Road was already identified as a mixed
I understand that, yeah,
with high density flats. I mean, I clearly, because of changes in government legislation, we've seen more flats come forward than originally anticipated in this location. But it does give you the opportunity to meet that need for housing, which perhaps then when you're looking at the Greenbelt sites, gives you the opportunity to make provision for family type housing.
But you still think that, despite what is a clearly an obvious change in numbers of house types that are certainly coming forward in central Welwyn Garden City, that overall you're on track to actually being able to provide the appropriate mix of accommodation that's set out in Table 4?
Well, our numbers have obviously gone up overall. Certainly in recent years, we've seen more 1 and 2 bedroom units come forward than family housing. But depending on where we end up with in terms of the housing target and the OAN, don't think it's disproportionate given that over a third of new dwellings need to be 1 and 2 bedroom units.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Waller?
Thank you, sir. I think part of the issue here as well is the fact that obviously this local plan is being examined against the 2012 MPPF and not the 2019 version, whereas planning applications are being considered against the 2019 version. The 2012 MPPF doesn't say an awful lot about making efficient use of land, whereas the 2019 version it has a whole chapter on the subject. However, the planning practice guidance has been updated and is relevant to the examination, as I understand it. So there is a section.
Yeah, it's a moot point that it's relevant in as far as it relates to 2012, and there's a very grey area between the two. But there's certain elements of the sort of updated PPG that are clearly not, relevant to the 2012 framework. The housing delivery test being one of them. So you really have to, interpret it with caution, should I say?
Okay. Well, there is a part of the PPG which talks about what tools are available to local planning authorities to help identify appropriate densities. Now, would you consider that was something that wasn't relevant under the 2012 MPPF?
I would say it's a general planning principle that all planners should have been looking at for years.
I think the 2012 MPPF talks about appropriate densities being something for the local authority to determine. Whereas the most recent version of the MPPF talks about it in terms of giving a bit more guidance on saying, right, boost densities around transport hubs and things like that. But this paragraph in the PPG, it's paragraph reference 66-004-2019-0722. And it talks about range of considerations should be taken into account, and tools that can assist include accessibility measures, so talking about public transport, etc., characterization studies and design strategies, environmental and infrastructure assessments, capacity of services, and viability. And those considerations are broadly the same actually as those in the NPPF, the current NPPF, such as paragraph 122. So I think that there is guidance there which points in the direction of making particularly efficient use of land where you've got better public transport connections and higher or more capacity in existing infrastructure. And those are relevant considerations which I would agree with you as well. That sort of this general point is a general planning principle. But in terms of hanging your hat on a policy or government guidance, I think there's something there which is relevant.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting for a minute that, you know, high-rise development, the Garden City set to one side is not appropriate, and that you shouldn't maximise the development potential close to transport nodes. You should. The main point I was really raising was, you know, given what is significant change in the sort of type of dwelling that's certainly coming forward in the short term, whether or not there have been fundamental changes in the overall nature of the supply, the sizes of dwellings proportionately or not, and if there had been, you know, how was it fitting into things? Then Miss Tyler's answered that, and I'll think about what she said. One other point before Mr. Quinton, you want to come back? Yes.
Just briefly, the other issue I think that does need considering is there's an assumption here that small flats will generate less children when we're looking at the education planning aspects of this. And I spoke to the education people this morning, one of Anthony's colleagues, and although they've got the full 3,000 potential new homes in the plan, they are assuming that there will be very few children because they are flats. If we're over providing 1 and 2 bedroom flats as part of the overall mix, then I think inevitably we are going to see families emerging in those dwellings. I mean, a lot of the new proposals are sort of aimed at starter homes, but starter homes tend to become small families before too long, and they don't always move out, and quite often can't afford to, particularly in the current climate. So I do think that's a consideration that does also need to be borne in mind, looking at, again, at the overall infrastructure requirements as the developments proposed.
Yeah, I'm sure Mr. Proetti is listening to what you've been saying. Before we leave generic matters, forgot what I was going to say now. Oh yeah, you're talking about doing an Article 4 direction, which I presume is going to take us back to where the situation was when the policy was originally written about safeguarding the employment areas. When do you expect the Article 4 direction to come into effect?
Shall I?
Oh, sorry, Miss Tyler's talking.
Sorry, I'll let Mr. Pycroft answer this actually, as he's been doing all the work.
Yeah, no, I can answer that if you like, sir. So the employment site EA1, the Welwyn Garden City employment area, is actually subject to a current Article 4 direction which came into effect in October last year. Now that removed the permitted development right to convert office to residential. And as you know, sir, not long after that, I can't remember the exact date, I think it was a matter of a few weeks after that came into effect, the new permitted development right came into effect that enables those premises to effectively be demolished and for purpose-built blocks of flats or for dwellings to be built in their place.
Yeah.
So we're actually currently consulting on an Article 4 direction which would remove that permitted development right. Consultation on that closes in a couple of weeks. And you know, as you know, so with the process that will have to, that consultation response will need to be collated and go back to members. But if members approve that, that would come into effect at the beginning of February next year. And that covers the, just for clarity, that covers the Welwyn Garden City employment area, EA1 in policy Salem 10, along with 3 sites in Hatfield and the Sapers Road industrial estate in Cuffley.
Okay, all right, thanks for that. All right, anybody got any more generic issues they wish to raise? If not, I'll move on to item 3, which is policy SB 16, SADM 19, site and 40A, Town Centre North Campus East. Councillor Quinton and the Welwyn Garden City Society raised concerns about this. Can I start with Welwyn Garden City Society, as we've heard a lot from Mr. Quinton so far?
Yes, thank you, sir. We're like Councillor Quinton, we're not opposed to revitalising the town centre. We recognise the need for a greater footfall in the town and more purchasing power within the town, although of course more residential units doesn't necessarily mean that the money will be spent in our town. But we do have concerns about densification of the Campus East area. For example, the Bridge Road access to the town centre has now been cut by 50% with a cycle lane taking out one of the carriageways into the town centre. And also the knock-on effect to the Campus West car park, which while we're very grateful that the 3-storey proposal for the Campus West car park has now been scrapped, we still don't know what's going to happen there, and we don't know how parking from Campus East is going to be accommodated in the town centre. We're not convinced that the present number of car parking spaces will be required post-pandemic. We were quite in favour of an original proposal to turn the town into a 24-hour city with more bars and restaurants in the town centre, but again, we wonder whether this is a practical proposal, whether post-pandemic this is going to actually have any basis in reality. We're concerned again that the Campus East site might go the way of Broadwater Road West, and we might see something 11 stories high going up there, which would not be in keeping with Garden City principles. Well, we'd like to support where we can, but we can't support anything that we don't see fits in with Garden City principles. But please trust me, we do try and imagine what the founding fathers of the Garden Cities might deem acceptable were they alive now. And you know, we don't want to be seen as fossils stuck in the late 19th century. Here we do see the need for progress, but it's got to be something in keeping with Garden City principles, and you know, we fear what might occur on the Campus East site may well not if the evidence of what's proposed on Broadwater Road West is...
Just forget Broadwater West.
Sorry.
What is there in the policy for Campus East that you don't like. I mean, I don't know if you're here when I was going through the first parts of the introduction, but I did say, if you want me to make changes, I need to know what's unsound about what they're putting forward in writing now. Not what you might think their development management team might do in 2-5 years' time, what's put in the policy now. So, I mean, what do you take exception to?
No, I think broadly we are in favour of what has been proposed. I mean, obviously we don't know what the knock-on effects to the Campus West site is going to be of building on campus.
I asked a whole series of questions about that following the representations various people made when they did the sites consultation in late 2019. And I mean, from my perspective, I mean, the council seemed to have thought it long and hard about, you know, well, not necessarily reducing overall car parking, but certainly reducing the amount of land that's devoted to car parking in the town centre. And, you know, they went or seem to have gone through a process which concluded that in the context of the needs of the wider town centre, it was better to develop at Campus East for housing than Campus West. Now, I couldn't see any flaws in that. I don't know if you can.
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Quinton.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, sir. And actually, the comments I put in predated the release of the car park strategy report from Arup. So
okay,
you can ignore those. It looks like the council are moving in the right direction on that. And yes, we do have sufficient car parking spaces in the town centre. I'm fairly convinced of that from what I've read. The only questions are detail really from there on.
All right, thank you for that. Anyone else want to say anything about Campus West? Sorry, Campus East? All right, let's move on to SB 17 then. SDS4 Broadwater Road West, site P102, the biopark. And while we're discussing that, we maybe ought to touch on the strategy diagram in the plan that the council are changing. I mean, effectively, the employment in the area is quite clearly going down. So who wishes to kick off with this? Mr. Wilson.
Yes, because if I may, you've obviously mentioned the diagram, and I would draw your attention to the main modifications for a policy, for a document reference EX235, and in there we are obviously proposing a modification that actually brings in site PEA 102, the biopark, into what is basically the guiding principles of the transformation of that part of Broadwater Road West. And that obviously brings us to have a look at in a bit more detail policy PS 17. And probably the first item on your list there, heritage. And there is a further modification as well to which we have agreed with Historic England there. So that's kind of what I'd wanted to say. So obviously you have picked up on the fact correctly that there is a loss of employment from what is there currently. Obviously, it would be a miss of me to not point out that there is a live planning application in for the biopark now, and it is for residential development over what is being proposed in our plan.
Okay. Is there a prior approval for conversion of existing building from offices to, well, they were offices, whether they were presumably technical workshops, from that to residential, or is it just simply an application to change the use of a building that by one means or another has become vacant?
It is the latter points they have identified to the council as part of their development management application that it is no longer needed for the employment purposes.
Well, it doesn't seem to be used, never mind needed. Do you know what happened to all the people that were using it?
I might ask my colleague Matt if he could join me there, because I think there's a little bit more of a story there.
Yeah, I can provide a little bit of history if that's helpful, sir, on the biopark. So the biopark was originally, sort of around about 10, 12 years ago, was taken over by the University of Hertfordshire. And it was actually a combination of sort of lab R&D space and office space. And I think initially the occupancy was very good, but that sort of dropped off over time. And I understand from the university they found it quite difficult to refill it, partly because I think the facilities were seen as sort of getting quite, getting on a bit and sort of getting quite old. And also from the point of view of the sort of the link to the university, obviously it was some distance from the university. So I think about 3-ish years ago, something like that, they lost quite a large tenant, and that actually sort of dropped the occupancy quite significantly. And they then took the view that it was sort of surplus to requirements. And I understand it was also quite quite an expensive building to run as well. So they closed it around about 2 years ago.
Okay, so the proposal basically is to demolish the existing building and erect a building as big or bigger. Is that reasonable?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think as big. I mean, I think Mr. Wilson's probably more familiar with the detail of the application than I am. But yes, certainly, I think I don't believe it's any bigger.
No, yes, it's come in for an application of 289 dwellings.
Okay, and in height terms, then how does that compare with the actual height of the building up to the top of its sort of plant area on the top? Forget the chimneys and what have you. Is it the same or smaller?
So my understanding is it is no larger, it is no higher than the building on site currently.
Okay, right. And you've got in your policy criteria for it, something you've agreed with Historic England about protecting listed buildings. Other than Hatfield House and what might be in the general area around it in the centre of Welwyn Garden City, is there anything else from a listed building perspective that's significant?
I think because I am fortunate to be joined by our colleagues at Historic England, I might ask them to come in. I know Miss Fawkes has provided comments on the application itself.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I think you were asking other than Hatfield House and the general environment.
Yeah.
So from Historic England's perspective, we have a remit to deal with grade 1, grade 2 stars to the highly graded heritage assets. But I understand from my colleagues at Place Services that there is the conservation area to consider, plus the Roche factory building at grade 2, which lies, I think, slightly to the east of the site. But those don't come under our remit to comment on.
Okay. So it's not just Hatfield House then. I mean, it's rather unfortunate the location of this building in the context of the vista from Hatfield House. One wonders how it ever got built in the first place, but perhaps people didn't realise there would be an impact. I don't know. You're content with what the council are proposing to put in their policy criteria?
I'll just come in there. Yeah, so just to go back to the point you're making, I think my response to the hearing statement, I referred specifically to Hatfield House listed building and registered park and garden. I think on reflection, possibly, we could have said including Hatfield House and the registered park and garden. I think, for completeness, you could argue that we could highlight the other nearby listed buildings, so the shredded wheat factory and the Roche office building. But yes, I mean, we work closely with the council to agree that policy wording. We consider that the land in question is broadly suitable for development, but we do feel that further evidence is needed in the form of a heritage impact assessment, just to inform the design and layouts of the land, just to make sure that all harm is avoided and mitigated as far as possible.
Okay, thank you. I mean, Mr. Wilson, when are you expecting to be granting planning permission for this?
I understand, having spoken to the development management colleague yesterday, that it is likely to go to a committee sometime in the next couple of months. So
we basically
it's not March, April, May.
Yeah, but basically we're not going to have an adopted plan for then, so it's probably going to be a commitment, isn't it? Anyway.
Quite.
So it's not worth wasting a lot of time over.
Agreed.
I disagree, actually, because I feel that this is one planning application that's been determined, but we can't prejudge the outcome of that process. And even if it were granted permission, the permission could lapse in time, and so it's important to kind of get the policy as robust as we can now. Okay,
all right then, I'll take that on board. Thank you. All right, Mr. Quinton.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions for the council on this one, and possibly you can help. I was struggling to find the diagram that was being referred to in the document EX235. If someone could give me a page number, that would be helpful. But I do note in that document that the one of the main modification is actually reiterates what I already thought was in there, which is building height should be lower in the southern part of the site. And the setting of and longer views to heritage assets should be preserved. And that doesn't seem to be consistent with the massing that is being assumed in the numbers that are being put in here. Because although the Heller uses 250 rather than 289, which is in the application, that's basically just one floor less. So we're just knocking the 9th floor off the top. And if you look at the elevations that are in the plan, submitted proposal, then I think it's very clear that the overall massing up to that height is greater than the current building, despite the fact that it's not actually any higher in total, and certainly stands out head and shoulders above all the surrounding buildings.
Well, the current one, though, does, apart from the wheat building, doesn't it?
Yes, but I don't think over quite such the same broad mass. I may be wrong on that. I haven't made a direct comparison. Yeah. But so
you're saying basically that not only is the proposed building higher than the existing one, it's also got a greater floor area as well?
I believe so. I'll stand to be corrected. I mean, I've looked at the plans online. Yeah, it's always quite difficult getting a proper appreciation looking at small plans on a screen, but that was I copied one of them in the submission I sent you, sir, which I think made the point, looking from the south or from the north, just how it compared to the surrounding buildings. And I think that's more of an impact than the current building. But yeah, if I'm wrong on that, I apologise.
Yeah, oh well. Presumably somebody in Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council is going to look at the Planning Listed Buildings Act and all its associated guidance and make the judgment whether it meets the test. Then that's not really for here. Anyone else want to say anything about sites?
Sorry, sir. Could somebody direct me to that diagram that was being?
Oh, sorry. Yes, you wanted to know the reference, didn't you? In EX235.
I can't see a diagram anywhere in that document.
Hello there. I'm currently clicking away, doing my very best to locate it. Can I come
of course
back to you on that one, Councillor?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's nothing else to be said done on that, we'll move on to item 5, which is Ps 103, 104, which is the YMCA. Now, as I see that, it looks like the redevelopment of an existing building. So Councillor Quinton have got points about it. Do you still want to make them? You haven't turned your microphone on.
I beg your pardon. Yes, no, I don't have a problem with that one. It's a small scale development and it's entirely supported.
Okay, Mr. Wilson, you want to say something?
I just want to say extremely quickly that that is another one that is a live planning application, and my understanding is it is set for committee in March, in about a fortnight's time, or
Okay,
in about a week's time even.
all right. While we're talking about the YMCA, between the YMCA and Broadwater Road, there looks to be a fair amount of, I wouldn't say it's all unused, some of it is, but an awful lot of underutilised land, some of which seems to be a county council highway depot. Not a very great place for a county council highway depot, but I've no doubt it's probably been there for decades. What is happening there? And I mean, isn't that something that, you know, if you're trying to sort this area out, shouldn't it be comprehensively looked at, as Councillor Quinton keeps suggesting?
Yes, and what I would probably point out is its proximity to Pear Tree Primary School and how it can work as an opportunity for the potential relocation and expansion of that school.
Oh, okay. Mr. Quinton.
I don't think it's part of the proposed new school area, unless I'm again mistaken. I mean, there isn't. I would have said that, you know, again, it just feeds back into the point. Thank you, sir, for mentioning it. That we need a more coherent plan for the whole area. I mean, possibly it could be a new green space for the area. Who knows? I mean, these are the sorts of things that we need planners to be looking at.
Okay, nothing else to say on that. Right, let's move on to item 6 then, which is P97, the Norton building, and 105, 106, which is the building in front of it, fronting Bridge Road East. We've got Anglin on, yeah. Okay, would you like to open it up, Mr. Ross, please?
Thank you, sir. Just very quickly, because you want to concentrate on tests of soundness, the only real issue we have is with the density of the numbers of units that seem to be prescribed in the policy. On other sites and the strategic sites, there seems to be a word approximately numbers, and all we would just want is a bit more flexibility, because we consider that the evidence that we have submitted demonstrates more housing can be provided. It's just a bit more flexibility in the policy. If it's a wording in terms of approximately or at least, because the question that you asked, sir, is shouldn't these sites look to be maximising development in such sustainable locations? And we agree. The council have just carried out a rule of thumb assessment, which I think is also discussed this morning in relation to some of the greenfield sites. And we just think that that should be a matter left for development management. That really is the only point that we wanted to make.
Okay. Do you want to respond, Mr. Wilson? I mean, is there an argument about the numbers that, you know, is mutually agreeable?
Yes.
Or are you just poles apart and you never will meet?
No, I definitely don't think we are poles apart and we will never meet. What I think is the case here is that we undertook our assessment, and the proposal has come on since our assessment has been taken place. I know on that particular site, I think we had flagged the potential issue about the relationship and potential noise issues. And I think, as has been the case on a number of other sites, when we've had that information and that extra level of certainty, we have amended our allocation accordingly.
Okay. And presumably whatever you agree with will be in accordance with the other policy.
Indeed.
Okay, I mean, it's one thing for development management to start diverting about it, but I mean, if we, you know, diverting it about it, calculating numbers for a local plan, then you have to start questioning whether the higher level policy is right. Okay.
Yep.
Does your development, Mr. Ross, cover 105, or is that separate?
No, it covers 105 as well, different ownership, sir.
But are the two ownerships then going to be amalgamated? There's going to be one development, or is there going to be two?
Two developments, sir.
Okay. And so can they be developed easily as two separate sites, or is there a need for some coordination, some comprehensive planning?
There could be. The challenge currently says, because it's two separate ownerships, they're coming forward at slightly different times. And site 97, which is the Norton building, is nearly ready for submission of a planning application, while the other site is slightly behind. If timings do work and they can come forward comprehensively, clearly that would be beneficial. But at this stage, it's just in terms of timing and different ownerships that is stopping it at the moment, sir.
Okay. Now, presumably, if this wasn't in the local plan, you could, under the current GDO regulations, get permission to do it.
So the 97 site, the Norton building, has already got approval for conversion under permitted development, and that could be carried out. But the number of units that would deliver is significantly lower than what a comprehensive redevelopment of that site could be provided.
But under the revised GPDO regs, you could knock it down and build something.
You could, sir, but I think there is a height restriction in terms of the maximum height of the buildings that can be demolished. This is a relatively tall building already, and I think it may not be fall within those requirements. And as I think you're aware, that the council are promoting an Article 4 direction to remove those permitted development rights as well. I think a planning application which leads to comprehensive redevelopment, including additional housing, open space, rationalising the car parking, trees, noise buffers, etc., is the right approach for development here, because that provides significant benefits.
But is it really a comprehensive redevelopment? It's just one site.
It's a small site, sir. I think the council have included several smaller sites within the new brownfield sites that they have brought forward. Certainly, as part of designs that we are looking at, there's the site on the frontage, which is the former council offices, which has been developed and is currently being developed at Taylor Wimpey. We're considering the relationship to that and how it works in terms of bringing that site forward. And so hopefully, as kind of the development, that kind of parcel of land with the other frontage site to Bridge Road East will be, at the end of the day, comprehensive redevelopment.
Yeah, but it's not really fitting into any predetermined plan, is it? Even if the plan has just got general parameters to work to.
No, well, no, I agree, sir.
Yep.
And I think we could just submit a planning application now. I mean, as the council have said, and as Mr. Wilson has said, the council does not have a 5-year housing land supply, this is a very sustainable, suitable site that has a fallback of consent for residential already. I think all we're doing here is supporting the council's position that this is an additional site that they have identified that could help them meet the housing requirements in a more sustainable location, and seeking to provide development in appropriate brownfield sites rather than more development on greenfield and greenbelt sites.
Okay. Mr. Quinton?
Yeah, I mean, I just would challenge the sustainable site comment without a proper assessment of the traffic in this area. We've already got an overly congested junction just around the corner from this site, the twin roundabout, Pear Tree Road and Chewing Road and Bridge Road. That came up in discussions about the new HWRC on Chewing Road recently. The projections that we were shown from county at that time show that even without that development, we are looking at a very congested future in that area. And as far as I can see, nothing has been done to address that in any of the documents I've seen.
Mr. Ross?
I'm not going to get into any argument, but I just want to comment. The whole purpose of putting development in sustainable locations next to the town centre is to reduce the reliance on cars, not increase them. That is one. Two, the studies that we have done and are discussed with the county council will demonstrate that in fact this development would lead to less cars on the strategic and the road network than the existing uses of offices. So in fact, these developments would be a benefit in terms of private cars, and this is where we should be locating development. You'd have very easy access to town centre and etc. and all the other facilities. So the aim, and certainly we are being pushed, is to reduce the amount of car parking and reduce the amount of private vehicles if at all possible.
But you could argue the reverse, couldn't you? An employment site, an intense employment site close to the town centre of the railway station has got, a sustainable catchment area that can travel there by train.
No, I totally agree.
Your people can catch a train to go somewhere else. I mean, it's as broad as it's long.
It is. In terms of the Norton building, the majority of that building has been empty for 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
And has been tried to be let and unsuccessfully. So it's not a site that currently has got significant employment on it. There's a significant amount of car parking again in that area. It's all hard surfaced, and development and redevelopment for residential would provide much more open space, would rationalise the car parking and provide a much higher quality environment than those buildings that currently have.
But it's also, a plank of the plan, but the council, wish to maintain, promote the employment growth of the area as well. An enormous area of land next to Welham Green at Marshmore in the Greenbelt is proposed for employment development.
I think, as Mr. Wilson said at the beginning, it's that balance, isn't it, in terms of the council having to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, but also having to meet employment needs. And where do you do which? And clearly, these kind of sustainable locations can provide significant amount of residential development in sustainable locations and provide an improvement over the current environment. You wouldn't be able to do that in relation to employment development in this kind of location. As I said, the building's been vacant for a significant amount of time.
Well, no, you'd have to knock the building down and rebuild something else.
Well,
and it wouldn't be as financially productive for your clients.
Well, we've looked at that, and if that was an option, that would have been done, but it's simply not viable to do that in terms of employment, of knocking the building down and putting employment there. The existing use values, etc., just simply wouldn't work, which is why the development has stayed there for such a long time without anything happening with it. My clients don't want to leave a vacant building for such a long time.
I know it's not a factory, but it's worked for B&Q next door, hasn't it? They can't have been there that long looking at the building.
Well, they've certainly been there for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wearing well. Mr. Quinton.
Yeah, just briefly on that. I mean, I wouldn't dispute that on looking at individual sites, you can demonstrate what you want to most of the time with the modelling that's done, and we keep hearing that this will have minimal effect or overall slightly beneficial effect on traffic. I don't really understand how that can be if it's been empty so long. But the point I'm making is that you need to do that area-wide study so that we can put all of this in context and really understand where the pinch points are. That's what we're lacking, and that's what should be feeding into the development of this entire area. Is a proper master planning exercise that includes transport at its heart.
Okay, last word then to, did you want to say something, Mr. Wilson? You've taken your hand down. You need to put your microphone on.
Indeed, it was just a very small point in the terms of Mr. Ross does have a fallback position in his prior approval as well.
Okay, so what is your delivery for this, or do you not have one?
So you're referring to the housing trajectory and when we anticipate it.
When are you expecting, it to be given consent and to get built?
Let me just check the housing trajectory. Well, I believe so. Sorry, I'm just trying to find this particular site on our list of sites. So 61 Bridge Road we have coming forward in year 4. I can't immediately see the Norton building one, but I would imagine it, yes, sorry. We have that one coming forward in years 3 and 4, so,
yeah.
So apologies for that. So within the first 5 years.
And when are you expecting development management to be giving it planning permission?
Well, the application hasn't been submitted.
Right, I see. Oh, yeah, okay. So we don't know. Okay, anything else on 97 and 105? Let's move on to item 6, which is P97 and 105, 106 Bridge Road East. When I did the site visit the other day, it looked as though there was a factory manufacturing bagels on most of the site, and then the other part of the site is a car showroom. Would somebody like to update me as to what the position actually is? Mr. Ross? No, so Mr. Waller?
Thank you, sir. Well, I suppose this site, 106, is effectively 2 sites on the ground. And so the car showroom has been empty for a little while now, I think about 1.5 to 2 years. The dealership, Land Rover effectively moved the dealership away, and they moved to another site in Hatfield. There's a covenant on the land which requires it only to be used for a car dealership, and the rent on the land is quite prohibitive. I think it's something like 240,000 a year, something like that, and the business rates were over 100,000 as well. So whilst it's been marketed, there was nobody who wanted to take it on, who could afford to take it on, really. And the landowner's happy to sit there for the next 20 years and collect the rent from the current tenant who lost the car dealership effectively. They're a large-scale car dealer with sites all over the place, but they just happened to lose that one. So effectively, the site wasn't going anywhere. There's a planning application in on the car dealership site at the moment for 111 flats, which I mentioned earlier. The council have confirmed that officers are supporting it, subject to Section 106. It's yet to go to planning committee. Expected to go to committee in the next couple of months, hopefully. So that's that part of the site. The other part, the bagel factory, we did have a planning application in relating to both sites together, which was for the 235 dwellings and also for office accommodation. The owner of the bagel factory is a separate ownership. Whilst they were supporting the application, they then at the last second did a deal with another food manufacturing company who needed a short-term fix because they were decamping from various sites and building a new facility up in Yorkshire. So they took on a short-term lease. I think there's about 3.5 years left on that lease now, to take this factory on as a stopgap measure whilst they build the new facility in Yorkshire, which I understand is underway now. And they're expected to, well, they've got 3.5 years left on the lease. They're actually expected to be out within 18 months to 2 years, at which point the site will be vacant again. Because this happened, the planning application on the 2 sites was withdrawn. That was essentially because the council withdrew their support for the proposals in light of the fact the bagel factory was being used again. It had become vacant because the previous business, Mr. Bagel, they moved to the Czech Republic. Because of Brexit, basically. The site was otherwise has been marketed, and actually it was the result of that marketing that resulted in it becoming used again. But as I say, the current occupant doesn't have any interest in it long term because they're building facilities elsewhere, so it will be available within a couple of years or so.
Is all that in chapter and verse before the council?
Yes, yeah, the council are aware of all of that. I think I've said most of it in my representations as well.
I mean, have you actually got correspondence from the current occupants that they want to move out in a matter of months?
Yes, yeah. Letters are being provided to the council before they took the decision to allocate the site.
I mean, both of these are contrary to SP8. First point, resisting the loss of land from Class B uses, and then there's a whole series of criteria you have to go through. I mean, I presume the car showroom's gone through the criteria, or is that not the case?
Well, the car showroom isn't a B class use. It's a sui generis use.
It's a sui generis, that's true, yes. I don't know how the council deal with those in these areas, it doesn't say.
And also, as I said, there were good reasons why it couldn't be used for a B class use, or at least not for the next 20 years until the lease expired.
Well, that assumes that whoever's paying the rent continues to pay the rent for the next 20 years.
Well, they're a large company, and they're fully able to pay the rent. They obviously don't want to, because it's a lot of money. But they're not about to go in default on their lease.
Yeah. But it's going to get planning permission, isn't it? The garage, so you say. So why should it be in the local plan? It can just go in as a commitment. X number of dwellings are coming out of here.
Well, I suppose
what you're saying to me, and what's generally coming out of the whole sort of theme of this session, is that really, certainly SADM 10, is questionable. I mean, the council almost accept anything that changes the use of, B-class uses to housing without any sort of consideration of the wider sort of facility, which is fair enough if you want a strategy that's going to, over time reduce the number of jobs in the town, but that isn't the strategy at the moment.
Well, the council have, obviously in some cases, there are sites which have already got prior approval, and the council have had to accept that there is a fallback position which allows for housing to come forward anyway. In other cases, if you're dealing with a planning application today, in light of the housing land supply, the housing delivery test, national policy, I think it's paragraph, I can't remember the number, but the national policy basically says, well, you've got to reconsider existing allocations in a local plan against the need for different types of development.
Mm-hmm.
The council have to live in the NPPF 2019 world when dealing with planning applications.
Yeah, but preparing a local plan is not sort of looking at pepper pot distributions. Preparing a local plan will be saying, yeah, maybe we've got too much employment land. What is marginal to it? What's not making a pretty good contribution to the council's employment opportunities, and we'll have a block of land, and we will, promote its change to housing over a period through the plan period. But that isn't what's before the examination, is it?
No, I think that reflects the
speculative applications in the context of the recent government changes to GPDO.
I think the problem is that the council have never embraced the idea of reallocating employment land to residential until a relatively late stage when they've been forced to look at it, and they've never really kind of tried to. It's always been something they wouldn't touch up until relatively recently. So these things are happening through planning applications and piecemeal process, and the fact that we've got a local plan that's 15 years old, the situation on the ground has been changing effectively whilst the local plan has not been moving.
Yeah, I understand that, but to me that says, given that they're taking Article 4 directions out, that they don't really want it to change. So if they don't really want it to change, why are they suddenly using a local plan to push some of these forward? If they come forward through, the changes to GPDO and there's nothing to do about it, that's one thing. But this is actually promoting the development of parts of this employment area in a somewhat sporadic way for housing, not comprehensively.
No, well, I think that there is some logic to what was touched on before, redesignating sort of these areas as mixed-use areas, because actually they have changed. I mean, this site is surrounded by housing sites now, actually.
Yeah.
There are some on Swallow Fields to the east, and and actually to the north. So there's Inspira House to the north, which is owned by the council, and I believe that the council are also taking ownership of the site directly behind on Swallow End. To provide, I think, providing affordable housing. The site's effectively surrounded by housing. I think that there was a question as well about a waste management facility. I think there's some sort of skip business immediately next to this site, which I don't actually think has planning permission. But in any case, we've undertaken a noise assessment and shown that we can attenuate the noise. But effectively, this is becoming more of a residential area than an employment area. It would make sense to look again at the designation of the land.
Mr. Quinton?
I guess I sort of agree with that in terms of, requesting an overall plan for this area. But I mean, I do question some of the history here. The submission my colleague, Councillor Cowan, made last year on this to the planning committee was clear that the new owner actually envisaged a long-term use, not a short-term use for this site as a factory. So I mean, what I'm hearing today is news to me, and I suppose might make a slight difference. But I can't really see how, as you say, sir, this is consistent with SADM 10.
Mr. Waller?
Thank you, sir. The question of whether it was a long-term or a short-term use, we actually have a letter from both from the owner of the site and also from the current operator talking about it being a short-term use, which we provided to the council previously. But also, I think that the question was asked when they first moved into the site, are you here for a short time or not? I think the problem with answering any kind of question like that is that you're employing people on the site and you don't want to tell them their jobs are going to be here today and gone tomorrow. And I think the question was possibly asked by the local paper. So people who are working there are going to read that and they're going to sort of choose as to whether to stay or have a job there or not. I think that was the context. This was a little while ago, the question was asked.
Okay. So, Mr. Wilson, have you got the correspondence he's referring to?
Sorry, in the terms of everything that has been submitted by the promoter, yes.
The current occupier of the factory, person who makes bagels, has supposedly written saying it's only temporary lease and they're going to move to wherever.
I believe we have that information.
Okay. Well, unless it's wrong, I'll take you at your word and assume that you've got the information. Okay. If it's wrong, you maybe let me know.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Anybody else want to say anything about this? Okay. Does anybody else want to say anything about, if you like, the basically loss of employment land and the redevelopment of these sites for housing purposes? If not, then item 7 is Hollybush Lane Neighbourhood Centre. Having read what the council submitted, I don't have any questions. I think it's quite an admirable proposal. Well, in some respects, it ought to come sooner rather than later in the plan period. But anybody want to say anything? Okay. I've just got a couple of other things that I would raise. One is the site at Creswick, which is quite close to Hollybush Lane. There's as you probably know, a very high voltage electricity set of pylons crossing the southern part of the site. I don't know what the regulations are, but I will be surprised if you can plant trees in close proximity to them. I don't know if that's been looked at, Ms. Tarley, or not, but it maybe ought to be, and there needs to be a decision as to where some sort of screening belt is going to go in relation to the trees, whether it's on the Welwyn Garden City side of the pylons and how far away from them, as I presume the electricity board must have an easement for the pylons across there and be paying rent to somebody for it. But you need to decide which side of the pylons it's going. And if the screening sort of belt is going on the southern side. When you get to the western part of the site, there is an area between the pylons and a hedge, which you maybe should look at whether or not it should be included into the development area, because if you're putting a tree screen south of the pylons, then this area is just there. It won't be found anymore. I mean, might be valuable open space, I don't know, but I mean, it certainly needs thinking about. All right, anybody wish to raise anything else? If not, thank you all very much for your attendance, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.